Garrett Finch had never broken furniture in a panic before, but there's a first for everything, especially when you're the only human at an alien academy, and you've completely forgotten about your midterm exam. The workshop of survival crafting and armament design hummed with the focused energy of students who actually remembered their assignments. Tools clinked against workbenches. The air carried the sharp bite of heated metal and sawdust, punctuated by the occasional curse in languages Garrett's translator couldn't parse. Professor Harunkan stood at the front of the room, his lower pair of arms crossed over his barrel chest, while his upper pair rested on a lectern, watching his students with the weary expression of someone who'd seen too many brilliant designs fail to become functional objects. 1 hour, Harnkin had announced at the start of class, his voice a low rumble that conveyed decades of trying to teach privileged academy students that sometimes theory needed to meet reality. Construct a functional, non-powered melee weapon from the materials provided. No plasma, no energy fields, no reality-bending nonsense. Just you, raw materials, and whatever craftsmanship you can muster. Garrett stared at the pile of wood, stone, and fiber on his workbench. His mind was completely, utterly blank. Around him, his classmates, the other misfits who couldn't test out of this course, had already begun their work. Kliek, the insectoid Therptian, whose mirrored eyes reflected the entire workshop, projected a holographic blueprint above her station. The design was gorgeous, all perfect angles and balanced weight distribution, showing a self-stabilizing kinetic halberd that would probably win design awards if she could ever manage to build the damn thing. Dromp, a living stone in vaguely humanoid form, held a piece of volcanic glass between massive fingers, with the delicacy of someone handling soap bubbles. The stone wright's craggy face scrunched in concentration as he attempted to nap the glass into something resembling a blade. Garrett watched him for 3 seconds before the piece crumbled to dust. "Apologies," Dromp rumbled, his voice like gravel in a tumbler. Z, the plant-based Sylvan who communicated through soft chimes that Garrett's translator turned into whispers, laid out vines, arranging them by thickness in a neat, deliberate row. Blibnor, the walking disaster of Amorph contained in a humanoid suit, had already accidentally absorbed 2 pieces of flint and made distressed bubbling sounds as it tried to extract them from its gelatinous mass. Garrett looked back at his materials, then at the chronometer on the wall. 48 minutes left. His brain offered nothing. Not a single idea. Just the persistent memory of those weird blue noodles from lunch that tasted like copper. Professor Harnkin moved between the workstations with the measured pace of someone who'd learned not to rush students working with sharp objects. His 4 arms allowed him to point out 4 different mistakes at once, a skill honed over years of teaching. "Kliek, stop redesigning and start building," he grumbled as he passed the 13th station. Her hologram had evolved into something that looked more like abstract art than a weapon. "Analysis paralysis has killed more craftsmen than any forge accident." Kliek's antennae twitched anxiously, but she dismissed the hologram and picked up actual materials with trembling limbs. Harnkin passed Garrett's station. The human hadn't moved. He hadn't even touched his materials. He just sat there on his wooden stool, staring at the pile, like it might spontaneously assemble itself into something useful. "Problem, Finch?" Garrett's head snapped up. No, sir. Just planning." Harnkin's expression suggested he'd heard that excuse before, and found it wanting. "Planning is what you do before class. Building's what you do during." He moved on, leaving Garrett to his panic. 38 minutes left. Garrett grabbed a piece of wood and turned it over in his hands. He tried to remember literally anything from the past 6 weeks of lectures. Something about grain patterns? joint stress, the proper angle for... The wood slipped from his fingers and clattered to the floor. 29 minutes. Around him, his classmates had made progress. Clea had assembled what looked like 3/4 of a quarterstaff before she'd realized she needed an extra joint that her materials didn't include. She now frantically tried to redesign one on the fly. Dromp had produced a small mountain of volcanic glass dust, and one surprisingly perfect arrowhead, about the size of a fingernail. Z had woven what appeared to be an extremely comfortable shoulder bag. Garrett remained frozen. His hands wouldn't cooperate. Every idea that flickered through his mind dissolved the moment he tried to grasp it. This was bad. This was very bad. He was going to fail, get kicked out of the academy, cause an interspecies incident, and humanity would never be invited to another galactic institution again. 15 minutes. Pure, sharp panic took over. Garrett looked down at the stool he was sitting on. 4 legs. Wooden. Sturdy enough to hold his weight for the past hour. His brain, operating on pure primate instinct now, offered a single thought. Leg. Pointy. Stick! Ooga booga! Before his conscious mind could interfere, Garrett stood, grabbed the stool, flipped it over, and found where one leg met the seat. There. A weak point where the wood grain didn't quite align. He gripped the leg with both hands, braced his foot against the seat, and pulled. Crack! The sound echoed through the workshop like a gunshot. Every head turned. Every project stopped. Even Blibnor stopped bubbling. Garrett stood there, breathing hard, holding a 2-foot length of splintered wood. The stool, now 3-legged and sad, lay discarded at his feet. The entire class stared at him, with expressions ranging from shock to horror to something that might have been awe if it wasn't so mixed with confusion. Did he just... Cleek's translator whispered. He broke furniture, Dromp confirmed, as if saying it out loud would make it make sense. Garrett, committed now to whatever insanity had gripped him, dropped to his knees. His fingers found a sharp flake of volcanic glass among Dromp's discards, one of the few pieces that hadn't been pulverized. With the kind of focus that only comes from having absolutely nothing left to lose, he used the glass to shave and scrape at the splintered end of the chair leg. The workshop remained silent, except for the sound of wood being carved. Shavings fell to the floor. The splinters gradually gave way to a crude but undeniable point. Garrett stood, held his creation aloft, and with confidence he absolutely did not feel, announced, Done! Professor Harrington had seen many things in his 60 years of teaching. He'd seen students build weapons of breathtaking beauty that shattered on first impact. He'd seen theoretical perfection that couldn't cut soft cheese. He'd seen enough failure to fill a museum of good intentions. He'd never seen someone vandalize furniture and call it coursework. The Volk professor approached Garrett's station with the careful gait of someone approaching an unexploded ordnance. The other students had submitted their projects, or what remained of them, and now watched with barely concealed fascination as Harrington picked up the chair leg. It was ugly, unbalanced, an insult to 10,000 years of weaponsmithing tradition. The point was uneven, the shaft still showed teeth marks from where the wood had splintered, and the whole thing had the aesthetic appeal of a half-eaten corn dog. Harrington tested its weight. He examined the point. He gave it an experimental thrust into the air. This, he said slowly, is the worst piece of craftsmanship I have seen in 6 decades. Garrett's stomach dropped. It's as crude as a rusty bolt. It has no balance, no refinement, no art. Harrington hefted it again, then looked directly at Garrett. It's also a functional weapon, which is more than I can say for most of what I'm looking at. He surveyed the other submissions. Kleek's beautiful halberd remained in precisely engineered pieces. Z's contribution appeared to be luxury camping equipment. Blibnor had somehow absorbed his entire project and made apologetic gurgles. Only Dromp's tiny arrowhead showed any promise, and it was too small to be practical as a weapon unless thrown very, very accurately. "Barely passing grade," Harrington announced, setting Garrett's spear down with surprising gentleness. "The rest of you, see me after class. Now, gather your creations. We're going to the training yard to see what fails first. Your projects, or my patience." The dismissal bell couldn't come fast enough. The training yard behind the workshop existed for exactly one purpose: proving whether your creation would actually work when it mattered. Synth gel dummies, designed to approximate the resistance of various biological tissues, stood in neat rows, like patients awaiting surgery. Most of the class trudged out with the enthusiasm of people heading to their own execution. Garrett carried his leg chair like it might bite him. The late afternoon sun, or rather the Academy's precisely calibrated solar simulators, cast long shadows across the yard. "Right then," Harrington announced, producing a datapad. "Let's see if any of you managed to create something that could defend you from anything more threatening than harsh language." Kleek went first, or tried to. She stood at the testing line, holding her collection of perfectly crafted components, and began explaining how they would work if assembled. "If," Harrington interrupted, "doesn't keep you alive. Next." Z presented the shoulder bag, demonstrating its superior weight distribution and comfort. Harrington's expression suggested he was reconsidering every life choice that had led him to this moment. Blibnor wobbled forward, attempting to produce its absorbed project, and instead expelled a slurry of metal filings and wood pulp onto the ground. "I'll just mark that as attempted," Harrington sighed. Dromp approached a dummy with visible reluctance. He'd spent the time since class trying to attach his tiny arrowhead to a stick with some spare fiber, creating what looked like the world's most disappointing toothpick. He drew back his massive arm, aimed carefully, and threw. The arrowhead missed entirely. The stick bounced off the dummy's head. Frustration finally overcame Dromp's careful control. With a sound like a rock slide, he stepped forward and simply punched the dummy. His fist went through the gel, through the reinforced backing, through the wall behind it, and approximately 6 inches into the ferrocrete support structure. "That's not exactly craftsmanship," Harrington said weakly. Garrett stepped up to the line, holding his ugly spear with sweaty palms. He had no technique, no training, no idea what he was doing. But humans had been poking things with sharp sticks for about 2 million years, and some instincts run deep. He took 3 running steps and shoved. The chair leg punched through the dummy's torso with a wet thump, lodging itself firmly in the gel. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't pretty. But the dummy was definitely dead, assuming it had been alive to begin with. "Functional," Harrington announced, and in his tone was something that might have been approval if you squinted. "Ugly as a mud wasp's nest, and as crude as a caveman's club. But functional." The workshop felt different during cleanup. Quieter, but not uncomfortably so. The kind of quiet that comes after shared embarrassment transforms into something like camaraderie. Garrett was trying to extract wood shavings from the floor grates when Dromp's shadow fell over him. The stonewright stood there, massive hands clasped carefully together, looking like a mountain trying to ask for directions. "How?" Dromp asked eventually. "How what?" "How do you not destroy everything?" The genuine distress in the rocky voice was painful to hear. I calibrate. I measure. I practice control. But everything still breaks. Before Garrett could answer, Cleek approached, her antennae twitching with nervous energy.
I also have a query. Your design process. You bypassed 19 standard steps. How did you maintain structural integrity without calculating stress factors?
I didn't, Garrett admitted. I just broke a chair and hoped for the best. Both aliens stared at him with expressions his translator suggested meant, that can't possibly be right. Pay attention, all of you. Harrington's voice cut through the workshop. He stood at the front, holding Garrett's chair leg like a teaching prop. This thing is an abomination. It has no grace, no artistry. Garrett felt his face heat up. But, Harrington continued, the human saw a problem and found the fastest solution. He didn't get lost in theory. He didn't overthink it. He identified what needed doing, make something sharp and pointy, and did it. He looked directly at Cleek. Perfect is the enemy of good enough. Good enough keeps you alive. The professor set the spear down with surprising care. There's a lesson in that. Sometimes the ugliest solution is the best one, because it's one that actually exists. He turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Finch, you're paying for the stool. The next morning brought the kind of administrative visit that made everyone wish they'd called in sick. Director Hale swept into the workshop like chrome-plated judgment, her synthetic form reflecting distorted versions of everything around her. Professor Harrington, she said, her voice a series of perfectly modulated tones that somehow conveyed disappointment without having any actual emotion. I'm here for the quarterly review of your program. She said program the way others might say infectious disease. The director moved through the workshop, her movements clipped and precise, examining the equipment with the air of someone cataloging items for an estate sale. Such a significant allocation of space for such rudimentary methods. Do you know what the theoretical xenobiology department could do with facilities like these? Builds theories? Harrington suggested flatly. Hale's chrome face couldn't form expressions, but her pause suggested she was imagining one. They're developing revolutionary techniques in bioenhancement. Corporate partners from the Astro Mining Guild have expressed significant interest. Real advancement. Not this. She gestured at a workbench covered in wood shavings. Historical reenactment. She stopped at Garrett's station, where the chair-leg spear had been left leaning against the bench. And what is this? A functional weapon, Harrington said. It's vandalized furniture. Functional vandalized furniture. Hale picked up the spear, examining it like someone might examine a particularly questionable piece of abstract art. This is what you're teaching? Destruction of property as problem solving? I'm teaching students to survive with what they have, Harrington growled. Not everyone's going to have access to a molecular forge when things go sideways. When would things ever go sideways, as you so colorfully put it? Hale set the spear down with obvious distaste. We live in the most advanced civilization in galactic history. Your program prepares students for scenarios that will never occur. The director finished her sentence. The lights flickered. A low hum emanated from somewhere deeper in the academy, followed by a brief shriek of an alarm klaxon, before it was quickly silenced. Power fluctuations, Hale said dismissively. The exobiology wing is running some intensive simulations. Harrington's ears flattened against his skull. Never a good sign. What kind of simulations?
I wouldn't expect you to understand the complexities involved.
She turned to leave, then paused at the door. Your wilderness field exercise is next week, isn't it? The board will be very interested in the results. It would be a shame if the program couldn't justify its continued existence. The threat hung in the air long after her chrome form disappeared down the hallway. Well, Harrington said to the empty doorway, isn't that just dandy?
The Academy Arboretum existed as a tiny slice of various worlds, all crammed together in defiance of natural law. Purple grass from Glee's 667cc grew next to earth oaks, which shadowed fibrous, light-absorbing growths from Proxima Centauri. It was where students went to relax, study, or, in Garrett's current case, hide from the reality that he'd become the guy who broke a chair and called it innovation. He sat under something that might have been a tree, if trees were blue, and hummed, eating a nutrient bar that claimed to taste like chocolate, but had clearly never met chocolate in its life. Is this seat taken? Garrett looked up to find Cleix standing there, her mirrored eyes reflecting his surprise. Behind her, the rest of the workshop class had assembled, Dromp trying to look casual despite being about as subtle as a boulder, Z swaying slightly in the artificial breeze, and Blibnor somehow managing to look hopeful, despite having no discernible face. Free planet, Garrett said, scooting over. They arranged themselves in an awkward circle, the kind formed by people who weren't quite friends yet, but were considering the possibility. Your chair leg, Clea began, then paused, her antennae twitching. I've been analyzing it. It's a broken piece of furniture. Yes, exactly. Her excitement was unexpected. That's what's brilliant about it. You didn't see materials. You saw an object that already possessed the necessary characteristics. Length, reasonable durability, graspable circumference. You just revealed the weapon that was already there. Garrett stared at her. That's giving me way too much credit. I panicked and broke stuff. How? Dromp interjected. How do you panic productively? When I panic, I just break things wrong. There's no wrong way to break things, Garrett said, then considered his words. Okay, there are definitely wrong ways, but sometimes breaking things is the answer. Z's translator chimed softly. In my culture, we have a saying, the perfect leaf never falls from the tree. I thought it meant we should strive for perfection, but perhaps it means perfection is paralysis. On my world, Blibnor burbled, we have a saying too. Don't absorb anything you can't digest. I violated that pretty badly yesterday. Despite himself, Garrett laughed. On Earth, we have something called KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. That's rude, Dromp observed. It's supposed to be. It's a reminder that overthinking kills more projects than underthinking. Garrett took another bite of his not chocolate bar. My great-grandfather was an engineer, built bridges. He used to say that any idiot could build a bridge that stands. It takes an engineer to build one that barely stands, because that means you didn't waste material. That sounds terrifying, Cleix said. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. Then Garrett had an idea, which, given his track record, should have worried everyone. Hey Z, you still have those vines from yesterday? The crafting session that afternoon was probably the worst in the Academy's prestigious history, which made it perfect.
Garrett tried to attach the flake of volcanic glass to his chair leg with Z's vines, creating something that looked like a toddler's art project. The rock fell off immediately. He tried again, wrapping more vines. It fell off again, this time somehow managing to land point up, nearly impaling his foot. "You're doing it wrong." Harrington's voice came from behind them. They all jumped. The professor stood there, arms crossed, watching Garrett's pathetic attempts at hafting with the expression of someone witnessing a crime against craftsmanship. "If you're going to desecrate the ancient art of tool-making, at least do it properly." He sat down with them, and picked up the spear. "First, you need resin. Tree sap, ideally, but the Corvian trees here produce something similar." For the next hour, Harrington taught them the kind of practical skills that didn't make it into the official curriculum. How to identify good binding material. The proper way to wrap cordage for maximum hold. Why you never trust a knot you can't see. "My grandfather," Harrington said as he worked, "made fishing spears. Nothing fancy, just good, functional tools. He'd have words about this thing." He held up Garrett's improved spear, which now had the volcanic glass properly secured. Mostly profane ones, but he'd admit it would work.
Why don't we learn this in regular classes? Cleek asked.
"Because the Academy thinks traditional methods are obsolete. Director Hale would have us all using molecular assemblers and calling it crafting." His tone suggested opinions about that. But molecular assemblers don't work when you're stuck in the wilderness, with nothing but rocks and sticks. "When would we ever be stuck in the wilderness?" Dromp asked. Harrington gave him a long look. "Ask me again after next week's field exercise." The Pan-Galactic Artisan and Preparatory Academy's biodome was a monument to scientific achievement and bureaucratic excess. 60 square kilometers of carefully maintained wilderness, climate-controlled and monitored by thousands of sensors. It contained specimens from 40 different worlds, all living in artificial harmony. The Xenobiology department used it for their high-profile research, and programs like Harrington's were occasionally allowed access to its less dangerous sections. It was also, as Garrett discovered, surprisingly creepy when you were actually inside it. The class stood at the entrance, wearing field gear that looked like someone had designed hiking clothes based on a description of hiking by someone who'd never left a city. Garrett's pack contained emergency supplies he couldn't identify, and probably wouldn't know how to use. "Listen up," Harrington announced, his voice carrying an edge of tension. "This is your final practical evaluation. You have 6 hours to gather materials and craft basic survival tools using only what you find. No modern equipment except your emergency beacons." He paused, scanning their faces. "The administration wants to see if this program has value. Show them it does." They entered the biodome in a loose group, trying to look confident. The artificial sun felt almost real. The breeze carried actual pollen, and somewhere in the distance, something that wasn't quite a bird made a sound that wasn't quite a song. "This place is weird," Garrett muttered. "Define weird," Dromp replied, carefully stepping around a plant that looked like it was made of glass. "Weird is spending millions of credits to build a fake forest for survival training, when there are actual forests on so many inhabited planets."
The Academy likes controlled conditions, Cleek said, her antennae constantly moving as she cataloged everything around them. Real wilderness has variables.
"Variables are the point," Garrett argued. "You can't control emergencies." This time, the alarm was a facility-wide klaxon, followed by a recorded voice that sounded professionally calm about delivering terrible news. "Attention! Containment breach in Biodome Section 9. Class 3 bioforms have escaped primary enclosure. Please proceed to designated safe zones. They all looked at each other. What's a Class 3 bioform? Garrett asked.
Theoretically,
Cleek's voice pitched higher.
Something that requires military intervention to contain?
And practically? The answer came in the form of howls. Not one or two, but dozens, echoing through the artificial forest with predatory intent. Run, Harrington said quietly. Then, louder. Run! They scattered like startled prey, which, Garrett realized with clarity, they absolutely were. Behind them, crashing through the underbrush with no regard for the carefully maintained paths, came creatures that looked like someone had tried to design a wolf, given up halfway, and decided to add extra legs and teeth instead.
Skittermaws!
Cleek gasped as they ran.
Bioengineered for terraforming pest control!
Those are for pest control? Garrett vaulted over a fallen log, his chair leg spear clutched uselessly in one hand.
Very aggressive pest control!
The creatures moved wrong. Too fast for their size, too coordinated for animals. They spread out, flanking the fleeing students, herding them away from the paths and deeper into the artificial wilderness. A skittermaw lunged for Cleek, and Harrington reacted instantly, shoving her aside. The creature's claws raked across the professor's side as he fell. Garrett's foot caught on a root. He went down hard, rolling through the alien ferns that smelled like copper and mint. A skittermaw burst through the foliage, 6 legs propelling it directly at his throat. Pure instinct took over. Garrett brought the spear up as he fell backward, the creature's own momentum driving it onto the point. The volcanic glass tip, properly hafted thanks to Harunkin's teaching, punched through the thing's throat. It shrieked, a sound like tearing metal, and recoiled. This way! Garrett scrambled to his feet, pointing toward a narrow canyon he'd spotted during his fall. Choke point! We need a choke point! It wasn't strategy. It was panicked logic from 1,000 video games, the only plan his terrified brain could offer. But the others followed, dragging their wounded professor with them. When you're being chased by bioengineered killing machines, any plan beats no plan. The canyon was an artificial runoff channel, a crack in the biodome's rock formations maybe 3 meters wide at its narrowest point. Nutrient lines and water pipes ran along the base of the walls, fostering a thick growth of hardy vines. They squeezed in, Garrett pushing Cleek ahead of him as another skittermaw snapped at his heels. End of the line, Dromp announced unnecessarily. The canyon terminated in a rock wall about 20 meters in. Then we make our stand here, Garrett said, trying to sound confident instead of terrified. The skittermaws gathered at the canyon entrance, their wrongly jointed legs clicking against stone. They moved with pack intelligence, testing approaches, looking for weakness. We're gonna die, Blibnor whimpered, his gelatinous form quivering. No, Garrett said. We're not. We're gonna use what we have. What we have is nothing. Wrong. Garrett's mind raced, pulling together every survival show, every piece of human stubbornness bred into his DNA. Cleek, we need traps. Simple ones. Use those vines. Make tripwires. Anything to slow them down. I don't know how to. Now! The urgency in his voice cut through her paralysis. Dromp, we need a barrier. Rip rocks from the walls. Build a funnel. Make them come at us one at a time. I'll break everything, Dromp protested, his old fear resurfacing. That's the point. Break it right. Z, we need nets, webs, anything that tangles. Garrett grabbed Blibnor's containment suit. And you're our secret weapon. I am? You absorb things, right? Be ready to be the stickiest roadblock in history. The plan was insane, desperate, the kind that only made sense with no other options. And somehow, it worked. Kleek's first tripwire snapped immediately. The second one held for one skittermaw before breaking. But the third, thicker, woven from 3 vines, sent a creature tumbling into its packmates.
Their aggression is overriding their pack programming, she shouted. They're just charging. I did it! She exclaimed, then immediately built more.
Dromp, finally given permission to break things, went to work. Massive hands tore chunks of rock from the canyon walls, creating a rough barrier that forced the skittermaws into a narrow approach. When one tried to climb over, he punched it. The creature flew backward into 2 others with a satisfying crunch.
That felt good,
he admitted, surprised. Z worked, ripping vines from the walls. The nets weren't pretty, but they didn't need to be. A skittermaw leaped through Dromp's barrier only to land in a tangle of vegetation, its 6 legs turning from advantage to liability as it struggled to free itself. And Blibnor, brave, clumsy Blibnor, did something extraordinary. When a particularly large skittermaw made it past all their defenses, the amorph didn't run. Instead, he opened his containment suit and let his gelatinous form expand. The creature pounced, expecting to tear through flesh, and instead found itself absorbed to the shoulders in living adhesive.
I got it!
Blibnor burbled triumphantly.
It's really angry, but I got it!
The battle was a messy, disorganized scramble. Garrett's spear broke. He scrambled for another piece of wood. Kleek ran out of vines and started throwing rocks with surprising accuracy. Dromp accidentally brought down part of the canyon wall, which turned out to be helpful as it created more obstacles. From his position against the back wall, Garrett saw Professor Hrunken watching them. The Volk's face was pale from blood loss, but through the haze of the pain, Garrett saw the Volk's expression shift from shock to a raw, painful pride before his head slumped forward into unconsciousness. But they held. The security teams arrived 40 minutes after the initial breach alert. 40 minutes of bureaucratic finger-pointing while students fought for their lives. They came in full tactical gear, expecting to find casualties. They found the breach contained. 6 skittermaws were tangled in nets. 3 were unconscious from blunt force trauma. An acidic blob partially dissolved one. The rest had retreated, held at bay by a wall of improvised fortifications that looked like a child's fort had declared war on nature and won. In the center of it all, 5 students stood over their injured professor, shaking with adrenaline and exhaustion. The triumph hadn't set in yet. There was only the ragged sound of breathing and the stunned silence that follows a fight for your life. Director Hale arrived moments behind security, her chrome form practically vibrating with panic. The containment breach was a disaster. The delay in response was a scandal. The fact that students had been in danger would end careers. The fact that those students had survived, thrived even, using the rudimentary techniques she'd mocked. "Report," she demanded. The security chief looked uncomfortable.
Initial alerts from this sector were suppressed, Director. Seems there was a system malfunction in the exobiology wing. We were dispatched from Sector Gamma as soon as we got the full scoop. By then, the situation was contained.
He gestured at the improvised fortress.
The students managed to hold position using environmental materials and unconventional tactics.
That's not possible.
Nevertheless.
Hale surveyed the scene, her synthetic mind calculating angles. The media would eviscerate the Academy for the breach. But if she could spin this right, if she could present it as a triumph of Academy training... "Professor Hrunken requires medical attention," she announced, as if just noticing his injuries.
And these students should be commended for their innovative application of academy teachings. The infirmary smelled like antiseptic, and that particular brand of institutional cleaning solution that suggested things occasionally needed serious sanitizing. Harunkin sat propped up in bed, his shoulder and ribs wrapped in bio-bandages that hummed softly as they worked. His students. He'd started thinking of them as his students, not just the misfits, clustered around his bed like worried ducklings.
"You saved Kliek,"
Dromp said quietly.
"That Skittermaw would have had to deal with me,"
Harunkin interrupted. "Now, let's talk about what you did out there." They all started talking at once, a cacophony of excuses and explanations.
We know we didn't follow procedure. The tripwires weren't regulation standard.
"I absorbed something without proper safety measures." "Quiet."
Harunkin's voice cut through the noise.
"That was the ugliest, most improper, most beautifully functional display of survival crafting I have ever seen."
They stared at him.
"You took everything I taught you and threw it out the window. Then you took what was left, the core of it, the reason for it, and made it work."
He looked at Garrett.
"You especially. That chair leg started all of this."
"Sorry about the chair."
"Don't be. That chair saved lives. Ugly, crude, broken furniture saved lives."
Harunkin shifted, wincing slightly.
"Director Hale was here earlier. The program's safe. Turns out when the exobiology department's perfect creations nearly eat students, and those students survive using rudimentary crafting techniques, it makes for good publicity."
So, we passed?
Kliek asked, her antennae twitching.
"You did more than pass. I'm officially replacing your midterm workshop grades with your performance in the biodome. Full marks."
He added with something approaching a smile.
"And your final exam will be to document every incorrect technique you used for the Academy archives."
But they were all wrong, Z protested softly.
"Wrong and effective. Sometimes that's better than right and useless."
Harunkin settled back into his pillows.
"Now, get out of here. I need rest. And you need to figure out how to explain to biodome maintenance about your unauthorized terraforming."
As they filed out, Garrett paused at the door. "Professor, thanks for the hafting lesson. It saved my life."
"No, boy. Your willingness to break things saved your life. I just taught you how to break them better."
The Academy mess hall had seen many celebrations, but few quite like this one. 5 misfits sat around a table meant for 20, their meal trays pushed aside to make room for their trophy, a battered, blood-stained chair leg with a volcanic glass point.
"We should mount it," Kliek suggested. "Create a proper display with electromagnetic suspension fields and—"
"No," Garrett interrupted. "It should stay ugly. That's the point." Word of their survival swept through the Academy. Students who'd never acknowledged their existence now nodded in the hallways. The engineering department had requested copies of Kliek's adaptive tripwire deployment pattern. The biochemistry lab wanted to study Blibnor's absorption technique. Even Z had been approached about teaching a seminar on rapid utility weaving.
"We're famous,"
Blibnor burbled happily. "We're infamous," Garrett corrected. "There's a difference."
"What's the difference?"
"Famous is when people admire what you did. Infamous is when they can't believe you survived it." The mess hall doors opened, and Professor Harunkin entered, still moving carefully, but refusing to use the hover chair Medical had prescribed. He made his way to their table. pulling up a chair with a grunt. "Thought you should know," he said without preamble. "Director Hale has been summarily fired. The board takes a dim view of bioweapons escaping and their senior staff trying to cover it up."
Bioweapons? Garrett asked. I thought they were for pest control.
Very aggressive pest control, Harunkin said dryly. The kind that was supposed to be in stasis, not active deployment. Someone in exobiology got ambitious, tried to impress the corporate sponsors with a live demonstration. Didn't bother to check the testing schedule. He set a data pad on the table. Also, I've been asked to expand the program. Seems the board was impressed by your methods. They want me to develop a new curriculum. Adaptive survival crafting, they're calling it.
That sounds made up,
Drump observed. All course names are made up, but this one comes with funding and a mandate to teach students how to think, not just follow blueprints. He looked at Garrett. I might need an assistant instructor. Someone who understands the value of breaking things. Garrett nearly choked on his nutrient paste.
Me? I don't know anything about teaching.
You taught them. Harunkin gestured at the others. In that canyon, under pressure, you taught them to use what they had instead of mourning what they didn't. That's 90% of education right there. What's the other 10%? Paperwork, which is why I need an assistant. They all laughed, even Z's chimes sounding like giggles. Oh, Harunkin added, reaching into his apron pocket. Almost forgot. He pulled out a small object and set it on the table. It was a piece of volcanic glass, napped into a perfect blade, hafted to a handle with expert precision. Made this during my recovery. Proper technique, traditional methods, everything by the book. He picked up Garrett's chair leg spear and compared them. Mine's prettier, more balanced. Took 6 hours to make. He set it down. Yours is ugly, crude, and took 60 seconds. In a real fight, I know which one I'd rather have.
The pretty one?
Blibnor suggested, his form wobbling slightly. The one that exists when I need it. Harunkin stood carefully. First lesson of the new curriculum. Perfect is the enemy of good enough. Good enough keeps you alive. Perfect gets you eaten while you're still planning. He walked away, leaving them with their ugly trophy and their newfound reputation.
So,
Kleek said after a moment,
who wants to help me design a better tripwire? I have ideas about tensile strength and deployment angles.
No, Garrett said firmly. Your tripwires were perfect.
They broke constantly.
Exactly. They were perfectly imperfect. They did exactly what they needed to do, exactly when they needed to do it.
That makes no sense.
Welcome to being human. Drop picked up the chair leg, examining it with newfound respect.
On my world, we have a saying. The mountain that will not bend must break.
On mine, Z added softly, we say, the reed that bends survives the storm.
On mine,
Blibnor contributed,
we say, when in doubt, absorb.
They all looked at Garrett. On mine, he said, grinning, we have a different saying for every situation. But my favorite is, if it's stupid and it works, it's not stupid.
That's definitely stupid,
Kleek said. And it worked, Garrett countered. She considered this, antennae twitching.
I need to recalculate my entire worldview.
Or, Garrett suggested, hefting the chair leg like a torch. You could just break something and see what happens.
The Academy's archives would later record the incident as a successful demonstration of adaptive crisis management techniques by students of the Survival Crafting program. It was dry, bureaucratic, and missed the point entirely. The real story, the one passed down through generations of Academy students, proved much simpler. Once, a human panic broke a chair and called it a weapon. His classmates thought he was insane. His professor thought he was an idiot. The Academy administration thought he was a primitive. He was probably all of those things. He also survived when he shouldn't have, saved lives with ugly solutions, and proved that sometimes, in the space between perfect and possible, there's a broken chair leg that changes everything. The spear eventually ended up in the Academy Museum, displayed in a place of honor between a master craftsman ceremonial blade and a theoretical physicist prototype plasma cutter. The placard read, "Student Project, Midterm Submission, Passing Grade." Visitors often wondered why anyone would preserve such an ugly piece of vandalized furniture. The ones who understood, the ones who'd been in their own canyons, facing their own monsters, with nothing but desperation and ingenuity, they knew exactly why. Because when the crisis comes, when the theories fail, when perfection is a luxury you can't afford, you don't need the best solution. You need the one you can build right now. Even if it's just a broken chair leg and the audacity to call it a spear.